Good morning. Welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Social Media Manager for HAR. I'm joined this morning by Stephen Costello. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
We're excited to hear from you. So, Stephen, you are the Chief Recovery Officer for the City of Houston. Can you tell us about that role?
That's correct. So when I was on council from 2010 to 2015, ran against Mayor Turner. Then after I lost, I went back to my private practice, which is I had an engineering company at the time. And the mayor called me a month after he got elected, asked me to come back and work for him and to deal in primarily flooding. And so we talked over several months. Then we had the tax day of flood occur in 2016. I showed up a couple of days later in his office, and so we agreed that I would come work for him. And he jokingly called me the flood czar.
Yes.
Publicly said that, and I've had that label ever since, even though I have a new title now.
Yes, very good. So we have the flood czar on this morning. So if you're watching and you have questions for him, you can type them into the comments, and we'll get to those questions in a little bit. We have a lot of questions for you already, but we'll definitely get to the questions that you guys have as well. Also, I would encourage you to share this post with your audience. He's going to be sharing a lot of information when it comes to flood and recovery, obviously. So let's get into that. So what does recovery and resiliency mean when it comes to flooding?
Well, so it was a little different post Hurricane Harvey. So when Hurricane Harvey occurred, really we had a lot of facilities that were damaged. So on the recovery side, what our role is to focus with the federal agencies that bring resources down to the city. And so I coordinate with the two federal agencies that bring money to us through, and all federal dollars flow through the state first before they come to the city. So on the FEMA side, the money flows through the Texas Division of Emergency Management. We call it TDEM. And then the money comes to us. And then on the HUD side, when we get money for housing recovery, it goes to the General Land Office and then comes to us.
Okay.
So in both agency flow-throughs, we deal with recovery, we deal with hopefully investing in resiliency, which we can talk a little bit more about as we go through so many questions.
Sure. So let's break this down a little bit because there is a lot of confusion out there. And specifically about FEMA, what does FEMA actually do?
Yeah, so we actually have two paths within FEMA that we're dealing with. On the recovery side, it's called public assistance. So once the president declared a natural disaster, that opened up the federal coffers for us. And so what happens is the way you deal with public assistance is you negotiate with FEMA on facilities that were damaged. And then what happens is the recovery monies that come to us, it's usually 75% federal dollars, 25% local. But when President Trump was here, he called and said that he would go ahead and allow it to be 90% recovery. So for every dollar we spend, 90 cents comes from the federal government. Now on the recovery side, which is really kind of frustrating, what happens is it's every facility that's damaged, we negotiate with FEMA on the recovery dollars. And then it flows through 45 different steps. Two groups in FEMA, then goes over to OMB in Washington before it comes down to the state office before it comes to us. So it's a very time-consuming process. And so I publicly tell the public it takes usually 8 to 10 years for this type of fully to recover. Because we're estimating about $2 billion of damages. The other part of FEMA is right after the event, FEMA awarded the state of Texas what they would call hazard mitigation grants. So they gave the state of Texas a little over $870 million to spread across all of the state that got flooded. So you think about it as Rockport to Beaumont, Port Arthur. And so that's a 75-25% cost sharing. So you add in our local match, that's $1.1 billion. And so what the state was doing through TDEM's office is developing and working with agencies like ourselves to come up with what we call resiliency projects, not recovery, but investing in resiliency projects. So we have actually 3 applications that have been approved within that portal. One is Inwood Forest, the golf course conversion to detention, Lake Houston Dam structures that we're building, and then the recently announced North Canal project downtown. So we're excited about that avenue through FEMA.
Very good. So, I mean, obviously, you just mentioned it's a lot of hoops that these funds have to go through. So how is Houston working with FEMA and the General Land Office to try to speed up the process as much as possible?
So on the FEMA side, we actually have weekly calls with the local FEMA staff. They're very encouraged about trying to get things done as quickly as possible. We also have an outside consultant, Tetra Tech, that represents us when we're dealing with the federal agency. Now, once it goes through the local office, it then goes to the Denton office in FEMA, and we have a bi-weekly call with them where we go over each one of our projects to answer any questions they have. Once it goes to Washington, kind of like a black box. We just If we see delays, we reach out to our congressional delegation for help, which we've done, and they've been very, very helpful, both on the House side as well as the Senate side. Now, the interesting part when you mentioned with GLO, we have received Harbor Recovery money for housing, and that was through HUD, through GLO. And on that aspect of it, we had a direct allocation from HUD, but we still dealt with GLO in terms of what we call an action plan. So if you go to the city's website, you'll see that our housing action plan had 6 groups of people that we were going to help on the homeowners assistance program, and then we have multifamily development. So we have $1.3 billion that we're going to be spending over the next 6 to 8 years.
Okay. Very good. So the city's talked about reclaiming encroachments in the right-of-way as it impacts drainage. Can you explain what exactly that means?
Yeah, so actually it was interesting. We were just talking about that before I sat down.
Sure.
There was an article in today's paper about the county doing it as well. And what it is that people either inadvertently or intentionally encroach in the right-of-way for drainage. And really, a lot of times, they don't really realize that they either butt up to an existing easement and the property is undeveloped, so they just reclaim it as part of their yard. Or in the front, they want to do a beautification on the street side. And so those are challenges that we're having right now. On the city side, you would think about it if you visualize a roadside ditch network, and people would fill in the roadside ditch in front of their house and then cover it and then park there. So they want added parking. So it's the challenges are different, whether it's in a curb and gutter neighborhood versus roadside ditches. So on our aspects of it, what we have reached out to the community, and we've talked to our district council members about it. The only time we're going to actively reclaim our right-of-way and ask people to move the encroachments out is if we have known house flooding there and we want to do drainage-related improvements. And that's the same thing that the county's doing in the article that was in the Chronicle today, was where they're doing projects where they've realized that they're encroachments, they're reaching out to the property owners and asking them to move those encroachments.
Okay, very good. So if you're watching this morning and you have questions for Stephen Costello, the flood czar, go ahead and type them into the comments, and we'll get to those in just a second. Some of the upcoming draining and infrastructure projects, the city has planned will create or add new parks and trail space. Can you talk about some of those projects, and which ones do you think that Houstonians will be most excited about?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The work that we do with the federal dollars is only for flood mitigation. Any related, what we would call amenities to a project, are privately raised dollars. So what we're doing on the Inwood Forest Golf Course, which is a golf course that was bought when I was on council back in 2010, is we're converting that golf course into regional detention.
Okay.
But what we have done is we're using federal dollars to build that project. It's about a $48 million project, and our sister agency is Harris County Flood Control District. But what we have done is we've recruited the Houston Parks Board to help us develop an amenity package that complements the holes in the grounds that we're going to be building. And so once the federal project is done, then we'll ask private dollars to come in and raise improvements to do trails, to do pocket parks, all around these linear golf course areas.
Okay, very good. So how can we learn more about these projects? Is there a website or a resource where we can go and see more information about these projects?
Yes, so we have, one of the websites is houstonrecovery.org, and so they can go to that to see where we are in terms of recovery. And that is both in terms of on the FEMA side as well as on the housing related side. And then what your viewers can do is go to my website, which is, if you go to the city's website, go to the mayor, go to the mayor's staff, and go to me, you'll see that we're loading stuff on there as well. And the hazard mitigation grant projects, the Inwood Forest, the Lake Houston Dam, and the North Canal, we'll be loading those up in terms of timelines and brief descriptions of those projects so everyone can view those.
Okay. So we were actually talking about this off camera as well. There's going to be a lot of new policymakers in office early next year. What do you expect to see as priorities when it comes to flood resilience and infrastructure?
Yeah, so just following the election, a lot of people are talking about flooding. All the candidates are.
Yeah, of course.
So we know that's going to be a primary interest of the new council. Normally what happens when you become a new council member, just from my experience, is that each department briefs those new council members on things they're working on. So I would assume I'll have a role in that briefing of the new council members. Also, the mayor has asked me and my office to develop sort of a follow-up to a report that was presented last November. So last November, my predecessor, Marvin Odom, gave a briefing to City Council about the status of harbor recovery. And so what we'll do is we'll make another briefing formally to the mayor and council a year later. or a little over a year later to give an update on where we are in the recovery. So we'll both do individual briefings as well as a public briefing, and we'll have that document online when we're done.
All right, very good. So if you have any questions for Stephen Costello, go ahead and type them in. It doesn't look like we have any at the moment, just a lot of people telling you good morning. Somebody
morning.
typed up your website for everybody to make it a little easier too, so that's helpful. So and we always like to ask our guests this, how can our members help? What are some things that Houston area realtors can do to promote resilience in their communities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so whenever I'm out publicly speaking, it's usually I'm out publicly speaking with Russ Poppy with Harris County Flood Control District.
Mm-hmm.
And before we start our panel discussions, he and I both ask two questions. He takes one and I take one. And the first question is always how many of us know where we live? Which means what he's asking is, do you know what watershed you live in? Do you know where the flood risks are? And it's amazingly frustrating for us as regulators to see that less than 40% of the audience knows where they live, in terms of are you near Braze, are you near Buffalo Bayou, are you near White Oak? And then I asked the follow-up question, how many of us have flood insurance? And it's even less. And that is really, really frustrating, because that's probably the cheapest flood insurance cheapest insurance you can buy, even cheaper than if you were a 20-year-old buying term life insurance. And so we encourage everybody to get a better understanding of where they live so they know that the flood risk. And we also encourage them to get flood insurance. And the other thing that I remind everybody is that even if you're not in a regulatory floodplain, go out and buy flood insurance. And the reason why is that, first of all, the maps are what we call living maps. So they're always changing because we get more information year over year. But the other issue is that we have inadequate aging urban infrastructure, which is really what the city works on. And so you can actually get flooded from our drainage system because it's not working properly.
Right.
And so that's why we encourage everyone to get out and get flood insurance.
Very good. So to that point, Sherry actually asked a question, do you have to have flood insurance to get these funds?
So we are a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program. And so that's the only way we're able to get recovery dollars is because the city is a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program. The other thing that most people don't realize is that we're also a volunteer in what is all called a community rating system. So in the community rating system, FEMA looks at your development guidelines and your floodplain ordinance guidelines to see if, first of all, if they follow minimum standards, which is the National Flood Insurance Standards. But then if you make your standards stricter, you get credit for that. So the community rating system is a system that rates from 1 to 9. So we are the largest city in the country that has the best favorable community rating system, which is a 5. So for every point that you get from FEMA, it's a 5% reduction in flood insurance for our residents. So right now, everyone who buys flood insurance within the city of Houston doesn't realize this, but they get a 25% discount because of our community rating system. So we're excited about that. And so for instance, like when we recently changed our development ordinances back in September of last year, where we raised the elevation of minimum house slabs for new development, that's a goal in trying to increase our community rating system.
Very good. Ram asked, is there a streamlined process for folks who have been flooded to go throughout the buyout program?
So the interesting thing and the frustrating thing about the buyout program is number one, it's a volunteer program. And so what happens is year over year, and I'm not talking about Harvey, I'm just talking about, there's another program that FEMA has, it's called FMA, Flood Mitigation Assistance. So year over year, they have a small amount of money nationwide that's available for buyout, for voluntary buyout. And so we started participating in that program in 2015. So it's a year lag. So the money that's available in 15 shows up in 16. So what we do is we go out every year and ask residents if they're interested in a buyout. And so we get all of their requests. And so the first year we had less than 100. And then what we do is we evaluate what we would call a benefit to cost analysis for that particular house. And we use a 50-year time horizon. What that means is we estimate how many times you're going to get flooded and then what the recovery is going to be. We submit all that data to FEMA. FEMA picks the houses. We don't pick the houses. So the first year they picked 42 houses. In 2017 for 2016 money, they picked 39. It was really frustrating because Harvey, we didn't get any money under that program, FMA program.
Yeah.
And then in 2018, we got about 80.
Okay.
So they just approved 80. We're submitting another tranche of houses in this year for next year's money. That aside, on the Harvey money, we have about $40 million in buyout program that's available. So we'll be working with Harris County Flood Control District to give them money to do the buyouts for us inside the city limits. And so they are going through that process for us.
Okay. The amounts of homes approved, I'm curious, what is the percentage of what's submitted versus homes that are actually approved?
Oh, so we actually back, I want to say in 2017, pre-Harvey, we actually had several hundred homes, like almost 600 or 800 homes interested in buyout. But FEMA only approved 39.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about, relative to the countrywide, they had less than $40 million for the entire buyout program throughout the country, which is really an inadequate amount.
Right.
But if you think about it as a regulator, there are certain areas of the city where we should use eminent domain. There are certain locations in the city where they're in such flood threat that we should move them out permanently. And there's problems there. We have problems in some of those neighborhoods.
Yeah. Okay. Elizabeth asked, do you recommend flood insurance on undeveloped land?
No, it's not required. The flood insurance is only for whatever structural elements you're insuring.
Okay. Just a follow-up to Ram's question about the streamlined process that he was hoping for. He said, I have a couple clients that have had their homes flooded multiple times and been approached to have their homes bought out through FEMA, I believe. But now they're in the process and they feel like they're jumping through hoops to get it resolved.
There is a lot of paperwork resolved, whether it's even in the buyout or even in the recovery side. And it is a frustrating process. I think the city needs to do a better job of keeping people apprised of the process moving along, rather than just taking the application and then we wait and hear.
Right.
So we're encouraging, whether buyouts through our housing department or whether the buyouts through Public Works, to keep people informed of the process so that they understand, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time.
Okay. Sherry's just following back up. So all the people who get these funds to repair their homes must have flood insurance?
Yes, so in order to qualify for flood insurance, in order to qualify for public assistance, you have to have flood insurance. Now, for people who don't have flood insurance, there's another part of FEMA program called IA, Individual Assistance. And so they have, I think they could qualify for up to $30,000, but that was immediately following the event. Any related to buyout program or home elevations, you have had to have flood insurance.
Okay.
And also, if you're doing homeowners repair, which is what we're doing through the HUD program, on any homeowners repair, you have to maintain flood insurance now,
Okay.
once you get the homes repaired.
All right. Well, very good. Elizabeth has a comment here. I have a few clients. She actually asked about the undeveloped land. She said, I have a few clients that had their water wells and septic systems deemed contaminated on their undeveloped land.
So then she's asking whether or not you would qualify for any type of reimbursement. Now, I would suggest what you do as a private landowner that has some type of facilities that are on there that could be subject to threat of flooding, to reach out to FEMA to see if they would insure you and be able to get a policy for that. I'm more familiar with the actual residential and commercial structures.
Okay. Well, this actually is a commercial question coming in from Fabian. In commercial retail centers that have been flooded and the tenant's property is destroyed, can the tenant file a claim directly, or does the landlord owner have to file and distribute the money accordingly?
So I'm not an insurance agent, so just FYI. I don't really know the answer to that. I would assume that relative to insurance purposes, there is a tenant has insurance as well as the landowner does as well. So that's an insurance question I really don't know the answer to. Sorry.
No worries. Thank you. So it looks like all the questions that we have coming in at the moment from our members. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I think it's interesting how we talk about flooding. And I think the community realizes that we've had so many rainfall events over the past 5 or 6 years that flooding has really sort of dominated the conversation. I think what we have to manage the community's expectations relative to recovery and resiliency, that it takes years. Like, for instance, on the project that I'm going to start working on, which is the North Canal, which is a diversion canal downtown, that'll take 6 to 8 years. Even if I start today, in terms of a year's worth of design, a year's worth of environmental permitting, and then several years to acquire the right-of-way and several years to construct it. So when people say, well, how come things are not happening quick enough? There is a process. It takes a while for these big capital projects. The things that have the most direct impact, would be on the FEMA side would be home elevations and home buyout. Those are direct impact. On the HUD side, particularly through GLO, would be homeowner repair program or getting multifamily projects, either buying them out or building new ones. And so we're excited that on the HUD side, through the Homeowners Assistance Program, that we'll be able to help people right away. It's still a very cumbersome process.
Sure.
Dealing with HUD in terms of all the paperwork that's required. But once it gets going, we're excited that we can help a lot of people. So what I want to tell everyone is, particularly in the Homeowners Assistance Program, we have focused more on what we call the high priority people, which would be the elderly, elderly with children or handicapped. But there is a portion of the dollars that's set aside for what we would call reimbursement. So, and also on the HUD side, it's usually, it's income derivative. And so, but once you get beyond a certain amount of income, you can still apply for recovery dollars. So even if you made $1 million annually, but you repaired your house, you could qualify for up to $20,000 in repairs. That's probably a fraction of what you paid, but who would pass up $20,000?
Right.
So we want to remind everybody that if you did get flooded, if you did repair your house, you can still apply. So please go to the city's website, which is either houstonrecovery.org or go to the Housing Community Development website. They have a phone number that you can call and just see if you would qualify for recovery dollars.
Okay, very good. Robert submitted a question. Investors have purchased homes that were previously flooded and repaired and subsequently flooded a second or third time and then sold. Is there anything that can be done to help the ultimate buyer with the flood insurance cost that FEMA charges a premium rate?
So we don't get involved in rate structure and establishing of rates. FEMA
Okay.
does all that. The one thing that was interesting that was passed in the state legislature this past session was the notification, proper notification. Because what we're seeing is people come in, buy a flooded house, a business buys a flooded house.
Sure.
Sometimes they repair it without building permits, and then they go ahead and lease it to somebody rather than sell it. And the leasee is not aware of the subject to risk of flooding. And so this is an interesting law that was passed for proper notification of whether you're a leasing agent, whether you're a leasee of a residential structure or a buyer of a new house, of existing house, that you be notified that you're in a floodplain.
Okay.
So, but as far as the flood risk, I do need to caution, and we probably should be cautioning everybody, that FEMA is starting to head towards market-driven flood risk. And you're going to see insurance rates start to climb as a result of that. I think the first thing that will happen here post-Hurricane Harvey, post what we call Atlas 14, Atlas 14 is new rainfall that we have now. Harris County Flood Control District is going to be developing a new set of maps, citywide and countywide. So we anticipate those maps to come out sometime in about 2 years. So please go to Harris County Flood Control District's website and go to the mapping side, and they'll show you the timeline. And it's a very laborious timeline. It takes about 4 years, but once the maps become draft in 2 years, we'll be using them to administer future development and future development regulations. And so our risks are going to go up, and our insurance rates are going to go up.
Okay. Well, looks like that's all the questions we have that came in, but it sounds like what you're saying is recovery and resiliency, it takes some time.
It does.
It's not overnight, but it's encouraging to know that the city is working so well with these different government agencies to try to speed that up as much as possible. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
And of course, to all of our members, purchase flood insurance.
Yes. Know where you live.
Encourage your clients to purchase flood insurance as well, because it sounds like what you're saying is it's the best thing you can do for yourself. Absolutely. Okay. Well, that is it for this Member Focus Monday. We will see you back next Monday at 9 a.m. We're going to hear all about millennials and home buying from a realtor millennial, Nicole Lopez. So we'll see you then. Have a great week. Bye-bye.